Hey everyone, so as an actuary, a mathematician and an investment researcher with over 10 years experience, I've always been fascinated by the world we live in. That's what's led me to systems theory, as I believe it's one of the best ways to describe our world. So, in this series I'm going to run through different elements of systems theory and talk about how you can apply them to your daily lives. So let's get stuck into it and discuss churn. So what is churn as it relates to systems theory? Well, churn is essentially the process of change and turnover within the constituents of that system. So parts of the system inevitably change. In open systems, you get parts that come in and out, and in closed systems, you get parts that degrade over time. So churn refers to the inevitable process of that change. So here are 7 ways to think about churn in your everyday life. So point number 1 is this concept of impermanence. So lots of things around me were constants and hadn't really changed since the day I was born. So things like my friends, my family. And one day, things did change a lot and it hit me really hard, and I think it was me struggling to deal with this idea of impermanence. So the idea of that actually everything experiences some sort of change, some sort of turnover in your life, and so you better be prepared for it when it comes. Sometimes when you get this kind of change, or I'm going to say churn, in your daily experiences, it can be quite destabilizing because you're not used to dealing with this kind of new situation you've been thrust in, given that certain parts of your life are now gone. So I think the sooner you make peace with the idea of impermanence, that things don't last forever, the easier it is to deal with these situations. So point number 2, I'm going to talk about how parts inevitably wear out or go beyond their useful life, I would say, and need replacing. And I'm also going to tie in the second law of thermodynamics here, which is in closed systems, everything decays to chaos, or entropy increases. And this is an inevitable part of the world we live in as well. So I think understanding this is really important, because we need to understand that in order for the system to keep functioning well, there needs to be this level of churn, i.e. stuff needs to come in, stuff needs to come out, or parts need to be replaced to ensure that things keep functioning as they should. So I think if you could look at parts of your life where things aren't functioning necessarily how you'd like them to, and maybe think about bringing in fresh parts, or look for where parts of your system might be worn out. That might be introducing a new activity, say, into your life to create some new experiences. It might be creating some new friends because your old ones are not talking about things you want to be talking about anymore, or they don't have the same goals as you. So I think replacing those parts intentionally could be a good strategy. Point number 3 is that churn allows for evolution and change, particularly if your environment is changing beneath you. So you might have heard the Serenity Prayer, where you have controllables and uncontrollables, and the idea is knowing what's in your control and what's out of your control, and having the ability to know the difference. And I think, we don't often think about uncontrollables very much. So our environment is constantly shifting and changing, and also our situation as we move through. So I think if we embrace churn in our activities and the things we get up to, and sometimes our beliefs, we can make sure that we flow with this change and adapt to the new environment or situation better than if we were just a fixed and static person. So basically, if you stop doing certain things and start doing new things, you might be better adapted for your new environment. So an example here might be, when the pandemic hit, suddenly we weren't allowed to go out to nightclubs, so that part had to stop. And if I thought that churn in my activities, then I might have been really upset. But instead I just saw it as, now I have some spare time, I'm going to refocus and do something else with that time, which I think at the time was exercise and cycling and things. So just flow with it. And I think you can be much happier if you embrace that churn is a thing and your environments change and you have uncontrollables, and it's about working with those uncontrollables. So point number 4, which is kind of linked to the previous point, is about not fighting churn. So once you recognize that this is an inevitable part of life, you could actually embrace it and use it as an advantage, because actually a lot of people don't do that, in my opinion. And that's kind of backed up by Robert Greene in his book, The 48 Laws of Power. I think it's law 25, which is recreate yourself. So that talks about how it's a form of power to completely kind of change and evolve and basically churn through your identities or who you are, so that you keep other people guessing. And the 48th law of power is become formless. And that reminds me of, I think it's Bruce Lee that said, be like water. These are forms of power, because I think a lot of people like to put other people in boxes and say things like, so-and-so is a cyclist, or so-and-so likes to eat meat. And then if you're constantly changing and evolving based on new knowledge and new identities, that keeps people guessing and it keeps people talking about you. So yeah, definitely you can embrace churn and turn it into a form of advantage, I would say. So point number 5 is about not being domain specific when we talk about, like, one of the kind of allures of the concept of systems is that it's pretty broad and pretty loose in terms of definitions. So you can apply churn to so many different parts of your life. Like, say, we've spoken about friends, activities, beliefs, family members, this stuff, any kind of set you have or any system you have that you want to define will inevitably have churn, even though even the human body, is a system you could define with churn, where you're constantly kind of shedding old cells and growing new ones. So I think the point here is just to not be domain specific about it and just see where you could think about the concept of churn and why you might be able to use it to your advantage. I personally like to use it on my belief set, and that was something, when I was younger, I tried to understand, it's like, should I be fixing my beliefs or should I constantly be updating my beliefs based on new information? And I decided on the latter, and that fits nicely with this definition of churn. So you might have some beliefs and then you might encounter new information that conflicts one of those beliefs. So you should just allow yourself to change your mind, essentially, and not constantly just fight that new piece of information that's challenging your belief. Because if you're constantly fighting the new information, you essentially get back into a corner and you don't move with the rest of the world. And that could be quite a dangerous place to be. Point number 6 is that you could force churn if you're just stuck and bored. So if you're not evolving, you're not growing, then maybe one way to come around that is just to enforce some churn. So we spoke about doing new activities, but one of my favorites is actually just removing activities. So I recently started fasting on Mondays and Tuesdays, so not eating in the evenings. And it's interesting that I just created that gap in my schedule where I used to be preparing food and cleaning up after myself, and now that's just empty space. So it's interesting to see what kind of fills that time now, and naturally that's created an evolution in myself. And it's essentially just reading and drinking chamomile tea, which is actually just lovely. And I read books that I wouldn't normally be reading throughout the day, books that are more fiction orientated or just maybe a bit more philosophical. So that's been a really nice change, and I didn't initially target that at all. Basically what happened was I just stopped eating and followed my intuition or kind of interests during that time, and it's been really positive, I think. Point number 7 is that if you fight churn, it can be really, really time consuming, and you might find yourself doing stuff or being led down certain paths that may not suit you. So churn is inevitable, as we've spoken about in most kind of systems, and that means that if you try and fight it, you're typically going to lose, and you're typically going to get pushed into a weird kind of corner. So I think about like the costs involved when people try and stop people from leaving companies, for example, or when you're just fighting against something that is essentially much bigger than you. So I think if you embrace it, you might actually save a lot of energy and just accept the new. And also, the quicker you adapt to the new world and the new environment and the new system, the easier you're going to be able to deal with that next kind of phase. So definitely wouldn't advocate fighting against churn. It's kind of established as a constant, so fighting it is going to be a losing battle. So there we have it. That was my video on churn, and that was my final video in this series. Thank you so much for watching. If you watched all these, I thoroughly enjoyed doing them. I know they're quite niche, but I'm going to continue to kind of refine these ideas over time, and I hope they're resonating with some people. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to check out this one here from me. Thanks, Sim.